Morning, everybody. Standard, I got to always lower the mic. Hopefully everybody can see me out there. So I want to thank General Yellen for offering this opportunity to come forward and be able to speak to everybody today and give you a perspective of what we're dealing with in the Pentagon right now. And I'm going to focus on three areas. It's going to be budget, modernization, and because of a decision that the Secretary of the Army and the Chief made right before this, Christmas, the QDR office was given the charge of synchronizing and coordinating with the commission, which is going to oversee the future of the, basically brief out to Congress February 16 on the future of the Army and also on ARI. Now, before I start on the budget, and I'll tell you, the Honorable Bear's briefing was fantastic, and it's a great segue because he really talked about the strategic side of the budget, and I'm going to kind of focus it in on both the budget that we're dealing with in the Army, but also as I translate and transition to modernization and how it impacts the equipping peg is what we call it, or the equipping side of the budget, and then focus it in on Army aviation. Now, before I start on the budget itself, and this will put most people to sleep, I think it's important to understand the POM. And most of the times when I talk about the POM, clearly people, their eyes roll back and they're like, oh my God, you know, we don't want to hear about it because it can get a little bit excruciating in some of the detail and what we end up having to deal with in the Pentagon. But I think it's important to understand certain aspects of the POM, both for leaders and soldiers and industry, because many times when I was the director of the material in the Army G8 back in 2012 to 2013, I'd have industry or I'd have a commander come forward and say, because the DOM oversaw the equipping peg, the 7 divisions of the equipping peg in the POM build. And they'd say, hey, Frank, we'd like to get something in the POM this year. And I'd look at the calendar and I say, well, we'll see you next year. They go, what do you mean? Well, when you build the POM, there are certain steps that take place, and there is a break point where if you don't get your idea or your information viewed by certain folks, it's just not going to hit that POM, and it's going to have to roll over to the next year. So real quickly, understand this. So here are some, this is Frank Muth's POM 101. Because I am not a smart guy, and I kind of break it down when I talk about it into some very simple areas. Your first part is in December, and this is all going to focus on the equipping side for really kind of bring it together, and because the POM is made up of different pegs, program execution groups, but we're going to focus on the equipping one. So in December, in the Force Development Office of the G8, you have those 7 divisions. And it ranges from aviation, ground combat vehicle, intel, communications, logistics, artillery, ADA, across the board. They have what they call weapon systems reviews. That's when your program managers will come forward to those division chiefs, and they basically say, this is what we need for our programs for next year. And they kind of like, this is where they start their discussions and arguments about, this is what we need within our programs. Your division chiefs take that information in, they look at their overall portfolio, where they've balanced over the last couple years, and they start to bring those numbers together. In January, so that's right before Christmas, in January, those same division chiefs go to the first level of the GOSC that they have to get through, which was the 1-star review. And it's typically the Director of Resources, Jack Daniels, SES, and a couple other 1-stars across the Army staff. They go and defend their POM builds. And they spend about a month and they go through and they get guidance and they have to adjust, but this is really the number crunching, and they get down to the last dollar for each program. After they do that, we roll into February, March. They take that same briefing with the guidance from the 1-stars to the 2-stars. Now, at that point, you're starting to get all the additional priorities set into one list, different folks kind of either from TRADOC, different aspects from the G3, and it's starting to shape that overall POM build. After you do that, through the 2-stars, they kind of snap a chalk line because we've been given top line guidance of how far we can go. They say, all right, here's the chalk line, here's the list, the cutoff is here, everything up here can get funded, everything down here can't. They take that to the SRG, which is the Senior Review Group, get into the seniors up in the Army staff and in the Secretariat. What they do is they go forward, they say, here's our list, here's the chalk line. Well, there's some other aspects that we need to take into account. pull this above the line, so forth. They run that through, and that'll take us through spring. Then they hand it off to programs analysis and evaluation, and they lock the POM. That is in the springtime. Anyway, it can be usually April, May timeframe. PA&E checks the homework. At a certain point, they will hand it over to the Army Budget Office. They will ultimately hand it over through the summer to OSD, and then OSD through CAPE will do program reviews in the fall, and they'll check our homework. And they'll pick a certain number of programs of what we're going to fund. And then after that, at a certain point, it goes forward to the White House and then to Congress, typically in February. That is POM 101. So if you want to get your message heard, if you want to get into the system, understand your window is really that September, October, November, before the weapon system reviews begin, and certainly by January and February. You need to understand that because that impacts potential programs. Now, budget, let's talk sequestration. Sequestration. You know, right now, the posture hearings are going on. You've heard the numbers, and it's true. If we have full sequestration through 16, the numbers are very difficult for the Army to absorb, not just in the programming side of the house, not just the equipping, but in the personnel. Because right now, although I would check the numbers, but we're probably at 501, 502,000, going to 490, ultimately going to 450. If sequestration happens, you've heard the numbers, we go to 420. Now, Mr. Baer talked about the manning side of the house. You have to understand, for a balanced budget, historically, I talk about the budget it's a pie, it's an apple pie. And you have a big piece of pie that's the manning, you have a little bit smaller piece of pie that's equipping, you have another one that's training, you have another one that's O&M, and then there's some other smaller pieces. Historically, the manning has been 44 to 47% of the overall budget, that piece of pie. Nice big wedge of apple pie on Thanksgiving. Well, guess what? When we went from 560 down to 490, you expect that we were sitting at about 47% at that time frame, which is 2012-ish. When we would get to 490, our actual manning percentage, Bill, would go from 47%, you think it would go down, it goes to 49. And it's all those costs drivers that Mr. Baer talked about. So that's considerable in terms of what that cost and how you have to try to balance that. The three legs of a hollow force are your manning, your equipping, and your training. So how do you balance that, and how do you balance that as you're facing sequestration? It's a big challenge. Well, we have been taking it from our modernization piece of the pie. Historically, modernization is 24 to 27% for a balanced approach or a non-hollow force. Based on us bringing down the equipping side or the modernization side of the budget to help pay for the manning and to help infuse money into readiness. For example, right now, 24 to 27% historically, our equipping peg is down to 17%. So here's what that means. When I was the director of material and we built the POM for the equipping peg in 2012, 2013, our budget was on or about $27 billion. We're sitting at about $20 billion right now in the equipping. That's huge. In that time, we have had over 270 programs that were impacted. So that means impacted as either canceled, restructured, or moved to the right. If we go to sequestration, 137 additional programs will be impacted, which will end up, again, in those three areas: canceled, restructured, or moved to the right. That's big. That is a big impact to our modernization. It's a big impact to our investment. We had a panel yesterday and kind of segue a little bit, but we had people after Vietnam when the budgets were coming down, stayed to the course and went after Bradleys, M1s, Apaches, Blackhawks, the big five. You've heard it before. We're in that area right now. We've got to stay the course. At least for aviation, there's other side on ground combat vehicles that they're going to have to deal with too, and also on the comms. But on aviation, the big ones, FVL, ITEP, DVE, we've got to stay the course because the budgets will start to balance out a little bit in the next couple years, and we will need to have everything online. We need to have those systems that we're looking at now ready to go when we start to get an infusion so we can continue to modernize our force into the future. Now, people keep asking us up at the building, and they want examples. What is the impact of sequestration? And I think we had a window of it in the fall of 13. I was a Deputy Commanding General for support for the Big Red One, by the way, the oldest, most historic division in the United States Army. HOA. So as a DCGS, in that fall, we had two events occur. One was the government shutdown, but two, the balanced budget amendment, or the bridge from sequestration up to a higher level of funding to get us through the tough times, had not hit yet. Here's the impact. People ask us, give us examples. I'll give you an example. The previous year, the Big Red One's budget for annual training and operational maintenance was $144 million. We put in, because we had a little, a drawdown, not drawdown, but some changes in our training strategy, we had submitted $137 million. We got, for our budget, before the BBA hit, $77.1 million. So you ask, what is the impact to our training force, to our force, if we go through sequestration? When an operational and maintenance and training budget for a division gets cut by 50%, we were in a 6-week window before BBA hit. We were not training, we were not shooting, we were not driving. We ended up having to go to tankers down in the Aviation Brigade because they were deployed, because I couldn't buy gas for the tanks. Went down and drained those HEMTs to give them to the ground brigades just so we could get gas to move the vehicles. Thought maybe we were just one of those sole divisions. Maybe it was because I was a terrible S and I couldn't balance the budget. But no, I talked to friends in the 25th and they were in the same boat. And for those 6 weeks, they just had to move their strikers back and forth because they didn't want to flatten one side of the tires. That is an example of the impact of sequestration if we don't get through it. Now, there's two ways to bridge it, and I know they're talking about it in Congress right now. We've seen the example of BBA, balanced budget amendment, and just consider that a bridging aspect to get through those difficult times in sequestration. What you're hearing now, the discussion is OCO. And the challenge with OCO as a bridging mechanism, of course, is there's restrictions on what you can use OCO for. So as they debate and we move forward, just understand those impacts of sequestration. And at the same time, before I move on to kind of modernization, understand some of those basic concepts of POM. So sequestration, how it impacts our training, our readiness in the divisions, and also into modernization. Now, on our modernization, as I said before, the equipping peg had $27 billion in it in 2011. Today, it's on or about $20 billion. The historical average is 24 to 27%. Today, it's at about 17%. And I told you about the impacts of those programs, 270, potentially 137 if we go to full sequestration. The three biggest portfolios that impact modernization in your equipping peg is aviation, ground combat vehicles, and your communications. When I say communications, right now the biggest program is WIN-T, and those are increments, WIN-T, increment 1 Alpha, 1 Bravo, 2, and 3. 3 was the air domain. That was brought down in the last couple years to help pay for some other budget requirements across the equipping peg, but most of the spreading of dollars in the equipping peg in terms of paying for some of those bills came out of the ground combat vehicle portfolio. You're starting to see a little bit of a shift now that it's time to reinvest because we have challenges with some of the engineering change proposals they want to do to both your tank, your SEP V2 tanks, great tank, your A3 Bradleys through their engineer change proposals, the double V hull for your strikers, potential upgrades and weapon systems in the strikers. They've been putting that off for several years, and it's time that they're going to relook and basically put some more money into it. So it puts pressure on those other aspects of the equipping peg. Aviation. All right, now let's talk aviation. In 2012, the President's budget of 2012, the aviation portfolio was $7.5 billion. It has gone down 40%, and it's down to $4.5 billion. That is a significant drop. And of course, we like I've talked about, the impact to the communication side of the equipping peg with WIN-T, both in the Inc. 3 air domain, the Inc. 2, descoping that, and the capability sets. All of our budget pressures have fallen on the modernization and the equipping side of the budget. Because we've got to keep our force ready. We have to pay a manning bill. And by the way, when you try to bring forces down, you have to understand, if I take out force structure now, there is no savings for at least another 2 years. So you can't say if I took 20,000 soldiers out in 2015, the only time I'm going to start seeing that is in 2017. So that's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure on our equipping, and it's a lot of pressure on our modernization. But the drumbeat for Army Aviation, Future Vertical Lift, ITEP, DVE, getting after some of those capability gaps General Lundy has talked about throughout the last couple days. We've got to stay the course. We've got to be in the Pentagon every day in those different avenues of communication to make sure that dialogue is with the people to make those decisions and keep the pressure on. Now, what are some other ways to get after some of these pressures on the budget? It's a challenging subject right now. There's a lot of friction, I understand, but Aviation Restructure Initiative, cost savings, cost avoidance, $12 billion. $12 billion. But we have to understand that ARI is not just about moving Apaches, all right? It's a shift, a dynamic shift in how we train our young pilots coming out of flight school. In digital cockpits, dual engine, and with a capability within the simulation world that is, and the resolution is the best we've ever had. There's a cost savings in that. It's transitioning our Kiowa warriors. I'm a Kiowa warrior guy. There's a lot of emotion tied to that. Commanded 1st to 17th in Iraq in 04 and 05. But I understand the impacts to the budget, and I understand that there's very little trade space. But what are we going to get out of it? We're going to get out these attack reconnaissance squadrons that are manned and unmanned teamed with shadows, which is going to bring us an incredible capability within our divisions. Now, with ARI, that leads me into my last part, which is the commission. If you're not familiar with the Army Commission, I'm going to talk about it in two aspects. One is where we are right now with the Army Commission, and it's really titled the future of the Army Commission on both force structure and Aviation Restructure Initiative. But I'm going to also talk about I'm going to use as a historical analysis is the Air Force, because when we were given the task in December to help both synchronize and be the one-stop shop for the Commission for information to the rest of the Army, the QDR office, we did a lot of research with the Air Force Commission, which just finished out briefing in 2014. So for those of you who don't know, let's start from the beginning. The NDAA came out on 18 December, and it said the Army is going to have an Army Commission to determine the future structure of the Army and Aviation Restructure Initiative, more specifically the movement of the Apaches from the Compo 3 into Compo 1. 8 members would be picked, 4 from the President and 4 from Congress. They have 90 days from the time the NDAA was signed on the 18th of December to make those decisions or name those personnel on the commission. They were named on the 18th of March, and so they have 30 days from that point where they have to meet by law. Right now we're anticipating the commission is going to meet on the 17th of April. They will meet for 1 day. They will do in-briefs, ethics training. They will get sworn in, pick their chairman, vice chairman, and then pick their permanent executive director. Right now, the interim executive director, think of him as the chief of staff, is SES Mr. Ricky Smith, who works in the Pentagon. He's a TRADOC LNO for ARCIC. And then there's another person that's part of the commission, at least they're not a commission member, but they're part of the staff, and they're called the designated federal officer. And they have to ensure that the commission adheres to all the FACA rules. That is a Mr. Don Tyson, SES from the Army staff. We anticipate, based on the Air Force analysis, that they will meet for that 1 day and they will go away in terms back to their jobs, where they're living. And at that point, the staff will continue to form. The staff will form until June, and when the commission will come back together and they will start to hear testimony. And we anticipate, if it's like the Air Force, the first testimony will be the Secretary of the Army and the Chief. And then they will receive that testimony in briefings, and what we're working now is foundational briefings just for information to level the knowledge across the board about some things that are going on in the Army. They will take the summer, and they will take additional briefings, have public hearings, additional information papers, anything they need, and all their RFIs will come to the QDR office. That'll be distributed across the Army to gather the information and to provide it back to the commission. There was 110 RFIs processed for the Air Force. They will take the summer to do all of that. They will finish their traveling and their briefings and their testimony 1 October take the next 2.5 months, 3 months to put the report together, and then I'll brief Congress on 1 February 2016. They will provide recommendations for the future of the Army and ARI. Again, the Air Force received 42 recommendations. They're implementing 41 of them. So this is a huge undertaking for our Army and what we're going to do. And we as the QDR office will, based on the mission we've been given, have an open, flat, transparent system and process that we put into place, because I have partners with the National Guard, Brigadier General Fountain, and Major General Lesniak from the Reserve, and we are the QDR Commission team leads, and we have a GOSC, and we have a Council of Colonels, and we're overseen with a terms of reference to process that information. But we want to make sure that it's fully represented across the entire Army to ensure that we are providing the most accurate and articulate and analytical information to the Commission for them to make their best recommendations. So I appreciate, I've been talking for the last 15 or so minutes about, one, the budget, and giving you an update, at least the perspective from both my past experience and what I'm seeing in the Pentagon today, how that is impacting our modernization, and then how that has now subsequently impacted decisions with ARI, and ultimately the decision to have a commission to figure out the path forward for the Army and Army force structure, and also for future of aviation restructure initiative. I'll be around the rest of the day to answer any questions that you may have. I appreciate the time, and I really appreciate the fact that I'm not spending the day in the Pentagon. Thank you very much. Have a great day.